Welcome to episode 8 of Experts of the Americas by the Adrienne Arsht Latin America Center at the Atlantic Council. My name is Maria Fernanda Bozmoski. I'm the Deputy Director for Programs, and I'm honored to be here today with Benjamín Torres-Barrón, partner of Mining and Infrastructure Practice Group at Baker McKenzie. Benjamín, welcome.
Thank you for having me here. It's a pleasure.
Awesome. Benjamín, Latin America and the Caribbean is known for its vast natural resources. There's a variety of renewable energy resources which remain also largely untapped. The region is well positioned for rapid green energy growth. And due to the region's vulnerability to the effects of climate change, there has also been an interest to build a more sustainable and climate resilient society. Benjamín, how does the strategy for using renewable resources differ between the bigger and the smaller countries in the region? For example, how is it different in Mexico, Colombia, Brazil, and then in Costa Rica, Panama, and even the smaller island states in the Caribbean?
Well, I mean, there's a world of difference, of course. The larger countries, they have gained an well-advanced position with respect to the smaller countries regarding first the policies. Some of them have enacted and fostered important policies that create incentives for expanding the infrastructure for both the generation and also the transmission in order to evacuate these investments. Many of those countries, they do have certain goals that not only for the economic development, but also addressing climate change and just expanding the generation capacity based on renewable sources. For instance, Brazil, it's one of the countries that is leading into these efforts. Brazil has already committed to develop and generate renewable energy based on solar and also by wind, setting generation targets by 2030. The target that Brazil has in order to generate, they have assumed a commitment of meeting around 48% of demand, including wind and solar, by 2027. So other countries like Mexico, they have assumed 35% by 2035, including solar and wind. Some deviation about those numbers is the fact that many of those targets, they do include hydro and they do include other renewable sources such as geothermal. Many of them, they are around maybe 6% to 10% of existing sun and wind generation capacity, but we do see this decade as one of the decades where most advanced and important progress will be made. Many other countries like Chile, Colombia, they're also leading the efforts with the enactment and the deployment of the auctions. And maybe we can talk about those actions later, but obviously the auctions, they have been able to sustain and deploy specific amounts of generation capacity around those countries. The smaller countries, they do face an important challenge because first, they lack of investment. They don't have the policies that will create the platform required in order to bring this capacity into the country. And even if you bring that capacity, as I was explaining before, you do need the transmission infrastructure in order to couple that with the investment in terms of the generation. Many other countries like Mexico, Chile, they lead in solar because they do have, the largest potential for solar generation capacity among many other countries. So it's not only the economic incentives, it's not only the policies that are being implemented, but also the potential. And in Mexico and Chile, they do lead to this fashion. We can talk about that later if you like.
Benjamín, one of your last points right here was challenges. And a big challenge not only for Latin America and the Caribbean, but the world in the past year in the COVID-19 pandemic. As governments continue to assess policies to recover from the pandemic and regain their economic footing, many have suggested that renewable energy is a possible pathway to economic recovery, because moving toward greener options will not only generate potential new sources of jobs, but also counter the increasing risks of climate change that are leading to increased displacement and migration. My question for you is, Benjamín, how has the onset of COVID-19 accelerated or maybe de-accelerated the adoption and production of renewable energy sources?
Absolutely. This is a very interesting question. I think that's a question that can be responded in twofold manner. First, I think the arrival of COVID-19, created a major uncertainty, by all means, not only in the renewable area, but in all types of arenas, in terms of economic development, in terms of infrastructure investment, including, of course, within that, the renewable area. But I think that the immediate reaction to that is that many of the Latin American countries, as I was explaining earlier, they suspended their auctions. And obviously, that was also triggered by the fact that by the reduction in downsides of the economic activity during the pandemic, well, the electricity demand failed into certain levels that it did not created the need to increase the renewable energy portfolio. Let's not be confused about that, because many of the projects, the ongoing projects that were in progress of construction, they continued into that. So that's why when you see the numbers, sometimes the capacity of the renewable energy portfolio increased in Latin America in spite of COVID-19. But that was the result of those renewable, power plants that were under construction. But by suspending and interrupting the auctions, obviously it's accelerated the speed of the expansion and addition of renewable energy capacity into the industry. Now, on the other hand, you will see the important fall in the oil and gas prices, including the oil refining business, the gasoline. And even though that there was less consumption on that arena as well, because obviously there were more vehicles transiting into the streets, there was less need of consuming oil, gasoline, people was not traveling, and then there was less demand of jet fuel, among many other things. Well, the reduction of those prices, created a more direct competition between the renewables and those type of fuels. So really by having those fuels being reduced, sometimes 5, 8, 10 times of the price that we used to know, at least for a certain period of time. I mean, we saw prices below zero in terms of oil for a few weeks or a few days. Then that did not created the hunger in order to increase the renewable energy capacity. But on the other hand, after COVID-19, many of the countries, accelerated and they were more committed into the sustainability goals. Many other events happened. Companies realized that they needed to contribute and to help to mitigate the effect of global warming. United States coming in stronger with the commitment of the Paris Agreement. Many other countries realizing that they needed to invest in Latin America in a more sustainable growth, including green energy policies and accessing solid, independent, and secure renewable energy sources on site, as opposed to the challenges that they have in order to access electricity with transmission networks, or even the policies of many of the governments that they have migrated in the case of Mexico towards helping out and fostering the state-owned industry as opposed to the private generation that was led for many of the companies. So by accelerating the renewables, I think there is a big potential now from now on, because it could bring even 3 million of employments to the Latin American region, while our countries are fighting with COVID-19. It is important to recognize that although some countries are fading away in terms of the COVID-19 threat, many others are still fighting it intensively, though, and in particular in Latin America, because they don't have much access to the vaccination. And because of that, I think the solution of renewable energy, it's an important one, because it could really bring a large number of employees to these countries, fighting and counterbalancing the real challenges that economically those countries have. I mean, they do have the potential, they do have the need, and many of the companies are there, trying to mitigate the effect. And we can, according to IRENA, we know that there is potential to invest $45 billion per year until 2050 in Latin America. And that, is translated into an increase of 10% of the investment that was originally thought of with respect to the policies and specific plans before COVID-19. So in other words, I think COVID-19 has been accelerated the interest and the investment needs. Everybody has been realizing that one of the last frontiers that has to be, challenged and counterfeit would be the renewable energy investment, in particular with the era of COVID-19. And with renewable, we're not talking about power generation plants. I think we're talking more than that. I think the renewables, they really can stimulate the growth of many other areas, such as the industrial facilities, manufacturing, transportation, agrarian, all of those industries, they do benefit from renewables. And in turn, that could create in Latin America a reduction that could be even 20% on the carbon emissions that are expected by 2030.
Benjamín, on the last point of the different industries that could benefit from what we're talking about, definitely regulatory frameworks could facilitate the diversification of the energy sector in the region. What would you say are some of the biggest hindrances or challenges that are keeping green energy investors from expanding their presence in the region? And number two, what would you say, on the other hand, are opportunities that could stimulate big energy transformations in the region?
Yeah, well, there are many challenges. Some of them are common to most of the Latin American countries. Some of them are very particular and very local to that specific region or jurisdiction. One of the biggest challenges that I sustainably faced throughout the years, not only as a result of COVID, but even for decades, is the ability to secure land. Sometimes, as you know, many of the Latin American countries, they do have a lot of social imbalance, and particularly many of the areas where renewable energy projects, particularly wind and solar, they do demand a large amount of land in order to develop the projects. And because of that, there are many agrarian communities, low-income communities, peasants, Indian reservations, many others, which they have overprotective laws. They do have a social imbalance. Sometimes they do have even a different language and different rules and laws applicable to that area, which really creates a really difficult environment in order to secure that land peacefully and under a certain long-term investment. And it's not really about the money. Sometimes it's really about the cultural difference. It's not that the companies do not want to pay, and it's not that the companies, they don't want to create a specific investment framework for those communities. Is really the lack of information and how many communities are being manipulated by the social leaders under those investments. That's one of the main things that I have seen. Also, as I mentioned earlier, is a lack of infrastructure for interconnection. Sometimes there is not enough interconnection to evacuate that offtake on the power generation side. Sometimes the infrastructure is delayed. Sometimes the permits are not available, and many other things happen. Sometimes the infrastructure it is available, but it lacks of maintenance and a proper performance, and it has a lot of technical issues on that respect. So I think the infrastructure is going to be one of the key challenges for many countries like Mexico in the near future, where there has been minimum, practically zero infrastructure investment in terms of transmission. Another issue that we see is, the disparity on the policies, and I already talked about that as well. Some countries like Brazil, they do have a very strong and aggressive policy in order to increase the potential of expansion of infrastructure capacity in renewable. They even have some incentives where you can import equipment with a specific promotional custom tariffs that in many cases are equal to zero. It is important that, because it's not only about deploying the equipment and having the solar or wind or many other renewable generation facility at the location of the country, but it's the value chain. You need to have a good supply chain that will integrate the offtake, the supply of equipment, the delivery and performance, the construction, all that coupled with an appropriate policy that will protect your investment, that it will allow you to compete with other technologies and other conventional sources of generation, which we can highlight that in many cases now, fortunately, given the accessible prices and how competitive these equipments are, sometimes they can even compete with unsubsidized conventional sources of renewable. Of power generation. So this is something that we have to celebrate in terms of the low prices, accessibility for many of these renewable technologies. Among the advantages, that we see, you wanted to know about. We mentioned a few of the threats. You wanted to know about what are
the biggest. Yeah, I guess one, what is the biggest opportunities, and two, I'm just gonna take advantage of the asking you a question. Can you talk also about some of the biggest players that are emerging in this space in the region right now?
Yeah, well, the biggest players are the usual suspects, the usual companies that we know. But then they have been, and they have become more aggressive, and they've been focusing more into that. We see NG, EDF taking a more competitive stand, a more aggressive stand in many of those countries, particularly Brazil, Colombia, Chile, and Mexico. But we can see, a very interesting evolution for many other traditional oil and gas companies that are either acquiring renewable energy companies of mid-size, or they are developing technologies within in order to invest into these areas. You can see companies like Shell, BP, and many other oil and gas companies, particularly looking in Latin America as one of their ways in order to satisfy, their net zero carbon emissions targets that they have, many of them assume by 2050. So they are utilizing vehicles such as Lightsource BP in Latin America, which is a subsidiary of BP. Total has created a company called SAF Batteries that is just dedicated to development technology on solar batteries. Many other companies in the oil and gas arena, they have really looking into Latin America, among the world, in order to create those opportunities. There are many other companies in the real estate business with industrial park for manufacturing facilities, data centers that are also looking into renewable energy technologies. And by that, they're either developing that technology on their own and their isolated power, or hiring companies that can deliver those solutions into their industrial parks. But it's not only about one park or two, but there are a massive amount, dozens of industrial parks that are related on the region. Coming back to the threats, we mentioned about the threats. We spoke about the advantages. I think the advantages that the countries have is the natural potential. I already mentioned that Chile and Mexico, they do have a massive amount of solar potential. I think the regulation is getting there, but for other new technologies such as hydrogen or battery storage, I think in most of the countries there is a lack of adequate, proper, updated regulation that will clearly set and determine the state of laws and investment in order to have long-term deployment of these resources in those countries. So I think the last frontier is really to have those countries to set and enact specific regulations that will clearly set out the rules of the game in order to invest on those resources, I think.
And Benjamin, to close out the conversation, because we are running out of time, what would you say are some successful experiences, some lessons learned from other parts of the world that could help inform efforts to promote energy transformations in Latin America and the Caribbean?
Okay. There are several important lessons that Latin America can take from global efforts in relation to the energy transformation. Some of these, they are being implemented by other countries around the globe. The fundamentals of electricity supply and demand, they are still very important in all global markets. I think the government, many of them, especially Brazil, Chile, I think they will lead that. They have learned that strong policy support with aggressive high level of targets and continuing in evolving and improving the regulations is one of the keys. And I think Brazil and Chile they have been very successful on that. I think the auctions, we didn't speak about that a lot, but I think in the last 5 years, countries like Brazil, Mexico, Chile, Colombia, Argentina, they were able to expand dramatically their renewable energy portfolio capacity by awarding contracts under the auctions. And not only that, but those prices in most of the cases were extremely competitive with respect to other areas. So, they learned that the auctions was a very good tool in order for them to access renewable energy capacity and also just to receive that offtake under a very competitive price. I think, the government have realized that they do need a balance between the regulatory need, but also the economics of the project. Besides the auctions, I think the fact that many of the companies investing in Latin America, which have set specific goals for sustainability, they have access on unregulated market in countries like Brazil. I even think that Mexico has done a lot of good job on that, and many of them will be taking these decisions in the next 2 years or 3, trying to access directly power renewable generation capacity from local vendors, local companies that are either foreign or local, but they do have the offer to provide renewable energy resources to them. And I think, given the specific commitments that they have, they will be taking decisions very soon into this. I think those has been a few of the successes. The change on the regulatory reform, I did mention that there was a lack of regulation ahead of the new technologies, but on the other hand, I think many of the countries, they are investing, subsidizing, they are creating incentives for renewable energy investments. And I think, sometimes even the regulating those markets has been a major advantage for, the developing nations worldwide, because they can invest in those Latin American countries freely with stability long-term, a nice and available supply chain in many countries like Brazil and Mexico. There is a lot of capacity in terms of advisors, in terms of companies with the proper technology, in terms of having the supply of the equipment, in terms of having long-term experience in the financing, which also could be a very important part in order to assure the right development and growth of these investments.
Benjamín, thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for sharing your insights with us. And to you who are watching, thank you so much for joining us for yet another episode, Experts of the Americas, and we'll see you soon.